Hello and welcome back. This is Season 2 of the Onside Kick. Much as our name suggests, we survived a few comebacks of our own, but we are here ready for Season 2.0. It is myself and my wonderful friend, Ted Smith. We are back to bring you all of the action from Fox Sports Australia for the NFL. Here is Ted, mate. How are you doing?
Mate, all the action, big claim with what we just saw from week 2. I'm keen to get a little bite size of it, but what a weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. Classically, it always seems like the first few games where we're figuring everything out still. Lots of big comebacks from teams that are not supposed to be shitting the bed this early, but perhaps already have. I will get on to my lovely Miami Dolphins at one point, and much like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, we're hoping to be the new dynamic duo of Fox Sports NFL, mate. It's on the cards.
This is an Australian NFL podcast, so I feel safe saying this, but as a Newcastle Knights fan who started 2-0, wouldn't start counting your playoff wins just yet, buddy. But you have two nasty wide receivers, excellent teammates too. Some of the plays Tyreek Hill made, intentionally positioning himself as a decoy, just mixing it up, opening stuff up for Waddle. Jaceki had a good game too. I don't know if we're going to get on the Dolphins later, but...
We will. Let's start with the AFC though. And as always, we are going to spice in a little bit of Australian magic as well, how our Aussies fared. Throughout the year, there will be some special guests. We'll be lining up lots of Australian personalities who also do dabble in the NFL, much like ourselves. And we'll be able to get their spin on what they think is happening throughout this season. So there is quite a little bit to cover from this first week. I do apologise for missing the first week. As Ted knows, that was 100% my own fault. As I kept reminding him, this is all your fault, dude. I was in Africa, so I will take full responsibility for that. I was having a lovely time on the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. Hopefully these teams will reach their own summit come 20 weeks' time as well. Let's start with some AFC action. It started off perfectly on Thursday Night Football for us with the Chiefs beating the Chargers. We'll get through this one quickly. It was a little while ago, but once again, it looked like it was going to come down to the wire. Justin Herbert seems to be making a claim to being a little bit of kryptonite to the Chiefs on occasion. But once again, with that pick six, that was ultimately the big turning point. And from there, the Chiefs were able to close it out at home in Arrowhead.
Yeah, he's very good at getting close to beating the Chiefs. I'm pretty sure his first ever game when he came in for Tyrod Taylor, who got his lung punctured by the team doctor.
Yep.
Man, he was not meant to be ready. As soon as he hit the field, everyone was like, Tyreek is never playing for the Chargers again. He is special. Shows at first the Chiefs, but like I said, he'll beat them. He'll start beating them on the reg, you'd think.
Funny you mentioned that about the punctured lung, actually, because it was Justin Herbert who exited with rib issues as well. And it is the same team doctor, I noticed, who is there. And he must have been thinking as he's lying on that table, please don't do what you did to Tyrod, mate. Just leave it alone. It's fine.
Oh, that effort was made easier by the fact the coach wasn't telling him to punch a Tyrod. No, I'm joking. Yeah. Any news on whether Herbert will play next week, mate?
The mail I have received so far will suggest that he will try and tough it out.
Yeah.
But with rib issues and with the way he was wincing while he was throwing the ball, I'm not sure if that's necessarily the best direction to go in.
Well, the spin is, it's one of those injuries that will hurt but can't get any worse. I'm like, that's not how injuries work. A sore rib can turn into a broken rib, I'm sure. But he is a tough dude, as he showed. He looked like he could. He would have been struggling to get to the bathroom after that Thursday night, yet works through the pain, throws some darts in that fourth quarter. It's not just the arm talent. He's showing the things that we like in footballers, toughness, resilience. So, big future.
Yeah, for sure. Also in the AFC, the Pats turned around their week 1 disappointment to the Dolphins, to the mighty Dolphins, to beat the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are classically having a topsy-turvy start to the year. I suspect that they will continue to be a 500-ish team. Mitch Trubisky, as I pointed out to you before the game, I can't name too many times besides the first season with Chicago, as you pointed out, where he's won back-to-back games. I think that will continue to be the way this sort of plays out. The Pats, sort of unknown quantity, bunch of mediocre skill players trying to get the job done for Bill.
Yeah. They lost by 3 points. I think if TJ Watt plays that game, because they were not getting the same amount of pressure on the quarterback as they were when they played Burrow and the Bengals in week 1. And given that it was 3 points, and given that he is literally the best defensive player in the world at the moment, if you're going off last year's awards, of course, NFL's Defensive Player of the Year, he's worth 3 points, man. He changes stuff. It made me think, like, if the Rams didn't have Donald, like, it'd hurt, and we'd be a different team up front, and I think that's what hurt Pittsburgh the most. Trubisky, man, he made some good throws. Like that one to Frymouth, then the 2-point conversion.
Frymouth is a talent as well.
I think Frymouth, it may be a case that Frymouth is just Trubisky proof as opposed to them having a combination, because he got it done with Big Ben a few times last year as well, the big tight end.
These probably are two of the bigger bandwagon teams. I'm happy to say that. Call out a few of the listeners. Steelers and Pats. Where do we put them? Where's the ceiling for them this season? And I know it's a small sample size from what you've seen.
Well, Tomlin will have a winning record.
As will Bill.
Probably. But there's still some questions that need to be answered. Like that, every NFL fan knows by now that the Pats have tried to install a brand new offense, that zone blocking scheme that almost everyone else does. They've tried to catch up, but the preseason was terrible. They got nothing happening versus the Dolphins, really. Their big off-season signing, Parker, former Finns, he had 0 catches.
And he should not be considered a big off-season signing.
For the Pats, like, he's their number one receiver, unless it's Jacoby Myers. Like, the Pats do not have much talent there, as it shows. But, yeah, Mac Jones is a very, very good second-year quarterback. So, who knows? The ceiling's probably where they were last year. Yeah. Playoffs will struggle to beat the best teams consistently. But caveat that question mark on what their offense will look like going forward, because they don't even know.
Also in the AFC East is the Jets, who came from absolutely nowhere to upset those poor, predictable Brownies with, it must be mentioned, an onside kick, which we obviously love on this podcast.
Surely we ring a bell at the start of the episode when there's an onside kick.
We've got one, boys.
That leads to a fourth quarter comeback. That game was unbelievable, dude. Not just because of the content it provided, the history. Like, Cleveland Browns haven't won the first 2 games of any season since 1993.
With a backup QB as well.
And it was like, well, they're going to do it today because they're up by 13 points with a minute and a half versus Joe Flacco. I was like, nah, man. Curses are curses, bro. And Joe Flacco, did you see him run at all?
Nah.
Like, I want to find the right age group for Joe Flacco to run against, because it'd be like 7-year-olds or 8-year-olds and put him in a race against a bunch of these kids, because he would struggle. But he threw some dimes. The Jets have some really good young players. Their young running back, Breece Hall, I think, second-year running back.
Carter as well. Young.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, the only elephant in the quarterback room is young Zach Wilson, if he's the dude that can lead this team forward in the years to come, because this is where he is. This is where he's at, right? If Joe Flacco wins 3 out of 4 while he's gone, he won't get back in. So I think that kind of suggests that Zach Wilson has an uphill battle to prove that he's a permanent NFL starter once he comes back from his injury.
Yeah, the only thing on that I will say is I do hope that Zach Wilson is a more skillful quarterback than both Magic Mike White, who we love on this show.
Mike Whitebread, yeah.
And Joe Flacco. You would hope that at this point in both of their careers, he is a better quarterback than them, and I hope he is the future. But as a Dolphins fan who can now count a few more wins in the season, mate, I'm not scared of Joe Flacco and the Jets. So this is also exciting news. Yeah, and on that topic, we must cover the mighty Miami Dolphins, mate. 2-0. I don't remember territory like this for a long time in my fandom of this team. And yeah, the first week was a typical sort of performance. Our defense was great, and our offense did enough. That's a classic Dolphins line, I would say, when we win games. But then this week was something that we haven't seen from Tua Tagovailoa so far this through his NFL career. 6 touchdowns.
Not many people ever have done that, but yeah.
450 plus yards, mate. 2 picks as well, which one of them was a tip, so you can kind of excuse that, mate. He looked electric, and like we said, with Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. Tyreek, as you mentioned, mostly doing the work to just pull defenders away from the other options.
When he's not catching a $1.90. What a dude.
Throwing up the deuces on the
What a
way to the
dude.
end zone, brother. How good. Don't have to love him for his off-field content. Can love him for what he does on the field. That's where we can stand on Tyreek.
Yeah. Before we move on from the Finns, there's a couple of things I wanted to tell you. First time since 2006, a dude has led a team back from 21 points in the fourth quarter and won in regulation. It's quite a while. Tua is now 7-1 versus Super Bowl winning coaches.
Whoa.
Yeah, I told you liked it, buddy. Including the 4-0 start he had against Belichick, Bob Greasy, Hall of Famer, Dan Marino, Hall of Famer, Tua, the only 3 players to throw 6 touchdowns for the Miami Dolphins. Out of the 50, last one, and you just edit this out. Yeah, I just like talking football. Out of the 50-ish games that Tyreek Hill played with Mahomes, he racked up 10 or more receptions along with 150 yards or more 3 times in the 50-odd games. It's taken 2 or 2 to get to one of them. So Tyreek's done that 4 times in his career, which is an NFL record. So it's not to sleep on. Him and Jerry Rice are the only 2 dudes to go 150 yards, 10 catches 4 times in their career. And Tua has already shown that he can be the guy to facilitate Hill for massive days. So it sounds like hyperbole, but you look at the comeback, you look at where they did it against a potential MVP. We're not talking about Lamar Jackson. That's how crazy that game was. Yeah. Lamar Jackson's like, 75 yards to go. I'll just run and score. What a treat.
Yeah.
They also had the longest play this season. They returned a kick for 103 yards.
The kickoff.
Duvernay. Crazy, man. And they still lost 21 points up in the fourth quarter at home.
And it wasn't necessarily that they made terrible mistakes or played poorly in the fourth quarter. Tua just hit strikes, which is the crazy thing. Lamar was still moving the offense relatively well. They got the field goal. They got a game-leading field goal again when it was already at 36 all to get it to 39-36. And they just had enough time for Tua to go down the field. It looks so composed. I don't know. I think there have to be some questions, obviously, about Baltimore's defense. And,
well, they're meant to be better this year. They were garbage last year because everyone was hurt. I was like, oh, they're back. I was like, well, Tua just threw 6, so it's going there. Crazy weekend, man.
Yeah. It is awesome to see there has been a lot of Tua speculation leading into this season, especially with...
Surely it's snuffed.
I think it's early to say, but
it's 6 touchdowns is a strong argument.
And he looked good. He didn't know
that pass to Gesicki.
Yeah.
Laser.
In the end zone. Oof. Yeah, toe tap and everything. What about Gesicki's gritty, huh? He didn't quite get the moves going, but he really tried to get his robotic white arms into that nicely.
Not willing to call that a gritty. I can see what he was going for. Great touchdown, bud.
Slow amble around the end zone. That's what it was. While we're on AFC, we must talk about the Jags. The Jacksonville Jaguars holding a team to 0. Ted, in your lifetime, have the Jacksonville Jaguars held a team to 0 points?
How quickly we forget, but maybe. They made the AFC Championship game in 2016, 2017.
Probably should have won.
Oh, they had a chance. But, Blake Bortles.
Trevor Lawrence, a little bit different at Blake Bortles, you think? He's maybe got...
Well, absolutely. When he was coming out of Clemson, the players he was getting compared to in terms of how valued they were coming into the draft, John Elway, Peyton Manning, Andrew Luck, Trevor Lawrence. That's who he wants to be compared to. He doesn't want to be compared to Mac Jones. He doesn't want to be compared to...
Justin Fields.
Or the dude at the Texans.
Davis Mills.
Yeah. Yeah. Like Trevor Lawrence was touted to be the next dude.
Yeah.
The next dude. And big question mark up until this week's game. Had a couple of wins last year, 4 wins, but their best win last year was versus the Bills. They didn't score a touchdown, 9-6. Like today, Trevor Lawrence looked like a guy who can be the tide that rises the boats around him instead of just a facilitator and a potential bust.
Yeah. Composed, and the skill positions they've got around him, people they've brought in as well to help. Christian Kirk looked really good, for example. But as well, we must talk about the Colts side of this. I think a lot of people were hopeful. I mean, we're all hopeful that Matty Ice will maybe get back there and earn something for himself. To see how he started so far with the Colts has been very disappointing.
He's done. The last team to make the playoffs after going 0-2, I think, was Kansas City. They went 0-3, 0-4 with Alex Smith and Andy Reid. It's super rare. If you go back to last year, out of the 16 teams that lost in week 1, only 4 made the playoffs. The early part of the season is huge, man. If you go 0-2, they're like, oh, if they win a couple on the road, it's like, mate, the uphill battle is too uphill. No one makes it anymore. There's too many good teams out there, a lot of good quarterbacks. And I swear, if you're dealing with a crisis of confidence at the start of the season, not only are you 0-2 down, you're more likely to go 0-3 than more likely to lose in week 3 than the teams around you, because it's quicksand, dude.
Jonathan Taylor, the only part that should be able to push shit uphill, I guess. And even so far, to be held to 0. He had a few sort of breakaway half runs, but I don't know. I think there's an issue with the dynamic maybe between the quarterback and running back as well, the way things are getting moved around. Because, here's the exclamation mark point, mate. Adam Gotsis, rarely talked about on this pod. Adam Gotsis of Australia fame got a sack. Got himself a sack.
I remember when he got his 1 sack last year as well. he's met his quota early.
Yeah. 2 tackles as well, mate, for Gotsis. Let's move on to some other non-double-headed AFC results. That was weird. We had a bunch of AFC versus AFC games, not so many NFC versus NFC. There were a few split ones. First one that wasn't NFC, heads up, was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers playing the New Orleans Saints in a very chippy affair, which was still 3-3 in the fourth quarter.
With 7 minutes to go, 7.5 minutes to go.
Before Brady, as we talked about, is finally starting to show little bits of an actual personality for the first time in his entire career.
We've seen him get angry before. He can do angry.
Definitely the words coming out of his mouth were quite angry.
Say it.
You can see them in slow motion quite clearly. In fact, there should be a video element.
You're talking about the melee, right? The brawl?
Yeah, before Mike Evans came in and started.
Yeah, Mike Evans
finished what Brady started.
Yeah, Mike Evans, he hates the Saints. Was it Lattimore? Dude? Yeah, like that's an old feud.
Yeah.
So it was an excuse. It's like, oh, Lattimore's involved in a stink, like corporate elbow.
Yeah, that beef is so old it's corned, but they've been around for a long time. Those two, they were chirping again still after the game. I saw on Twitter when beef continues onto Twitter. That's when you know it's really spicy. But what do you think of that? Brady basically just had words to say. Next thing you know, we've got an altercation the whole field. To see benches clear and stuff as well, it's pretty rare these days to see that sort of big of a melee on the field.
Yeah. I mean, a lot more tension in this game than other games. Not just because it's a division game. It's because Tom Brady this is his 3rd year in Florida, and he's still yet to beat the Saints in the regular season. Got them once in the playoffs towards the Super Bowl run, of course. But, yeah, very, very edgy. Imagine how chirpy they're being out there. Like, they know each other really well. There's some personal stuff. It's week 2. Whoever wins this game goes to the lead in the NFC South. So, big game.
And at least in regular season, the Saints typically have a pretty good performance against Tampa and then get waxed by them in the playoffs. But
yeah. I mean, it was disappointing for Jameis Winston because it looked like he'd turned the corner from the 30 and 30 guy. His touchdown to interception ratio had improved dramatically, but I think that was because of Sean Payton. I don't think he did get laser eye surgery, but I think it's because Sean Payton, because now that he's not there, he's back to throwing more picks than he does TDs. And who knows, that could be a trend that continues. One more caveat, though. He's got Mike Thomas, and he looks like he could be in for a big season.
The only thing was, did you see the defensive end came out from Tampa Bay? I can't remember which one specifically, but after the game, he was asked, like, were you nervous as it was getting so close towards the end? And he was like, a few years ago, we had Jameis, you know. He threw 30 picks in a season. We knew we just had to wait patiently and eventually one would fall into our lap.
Yeah. He said that?
Oof. Yeah.
On the record. That's good. That's good. Were you nervous? No, we're playing Jameis.
It's like such good schoolyard banter that you just don't get to really hear so much in the NFL these days.
Yeah.
NFC games moving on. Lions. The mighty Detroit Lions, mate, beating the Washington Commanders. Difficult to say where we can stand on the Washington Commanders, but I tell you what, I have lots and lots of time for DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams rampaging up the middle of that field. If Jared Goff, as a handoff specialist, if all he has to do is hand off the ball, mate, that's where he excels. Todd Gurley-esque. Let's go.
How dare you? Why would you deprive St. Brown? Armand St. Brown.
True.
Getting the
God-like.
ball.
Sun God.
I drafted him in a keeper comp last year, had the opportunity to keep him, kept Debo for a lot more money. Been keeping me up at night. Should have went with my gut. I really like St. Brown, not just because of fantasy, the way he plays. He's hard. He looks small, but he is entirely muscle. And on this Lions win, it was huge, not just for the city of Detroit, who stunk last year, but for all fans of Hard Knocks, because we bought in.
We get content.
Yeah, we were told there was going to be a change, that this team was going to have some grit, and it took till week 2, but we got there, and we got there earlier than we did last season, and obviously have to mention Aiden Hutchinson, 3 sacks in the first half.
Yep, first home game as well.
Yeah, and second overall pick, right, by Detroit. Jacksonville got the first overall.
Yep.
Yeah, man, it's like, oh, they're an actual football team now. Like, good receivers. Good running backs, like not just a running back, not just a receiver. So
Jared Goff just has to do enough.
Jared Goff's been to more Super Bowls than the Dolphins have recently. All right.
Hey, while we're on that, why don't we talk about the Rams? Big win over the Falcons. This is your element, mate. Go nuts,
mate. I rage quit this game. I went back to it, but when Stafford threw that end zone pick with like 40 seconds to go in the first half, I was like, what? Stafford, mate. Like, and it sucked because I think he was like something like 10 from 10 up until that point, and then he's like, oh, Cooper Kupp's right there. It's like, mate, you've thrown it to him 7 times in a row. Please mix it up. But then, yeah, I flicked to another game, and then a score alert came up, and the Rams were up 21-3 because Mariota threw it straight back to the Rams, and we sorted that out.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I guess I'll watch the second half, just for shits and gigs. I love the Rams, but no way are Atlanta coming back because maybe the worst roster in football. And I saw a score come up, 28-3. Atlanta, and I was like, ooh, weird juju. And there was some weird juju. Block punt for a return touchdown by the Falcons really tipped the game on its head. They had chances down the stretch, which was crazy because Rams don't usually give up leads. Like Sean McVay's given up 1 second half lead in his life. So, yeah, 1-1, no reason for alarm bells. You lost to, the Bills. Everyone's going to do that this year. That's what it looks like so far. But, yeah, scrape at it with the win, but there's still lots for McVay to pick and to improve this team, which I'm sure he will.
Niners winning with Jimmy G because Trey Lance went down with that horrible ankle injury. We hate to see things like this. Seems like
season gone.
Yeah, it looks like it at least. Even NRL physio, who seems to be getting a workaround in lots of places.
What are you doing here, mate? Yeah.
And gave his 2 cents on what he thought had happened. But the reason I wanted to talk about this game, besides Jimmy G, is that we had an Aussie punt off, which we love.
Wisnowski.
And
oh God,
from Seattle, Dixon, mate.
Oh yes.
Of course.
Old Pete Dixon. No, I guessed his first name.
We are going to have to give it to Michael Dixon, though.
Thank you.
With an average of 50 yards on 5 attempts for almost 251 yards, 1 inside 20. Lovely day. Wisnowski, I guess, though, slightly less to do because his team was up so much. All good. Happy days for them.
Yeah. One thing I'll say about this, man, I think part of the San Francisco coaching staff will be a little bit relieved that the decision got taken out of their hands. But you just have to look at the stats from when Trey was still playing and compare him to when Jimmy G finished off the game. They were so run heavy with Trey, which is fair. And then just pass happy, almost 1 for 1. for every pass there was a run where run was dominating when Trey was in, like I said. So to me, it was like, well, you got to ask what kind of football does Shanahan prefer to coach? Like, does he want to be run heavy or does he want to pass it more? Because if he wants to pass it more, there's the quarterback that he probably prefers, right? The guy with like one of the best spirals, the guy that's been to 2 NFC championship games, the guy that is beloved by everyone who shakes his hand. Like, yeah, good call keeping him in the end.
Offering him that contract extension. And I wonder how close he realistically was. Mate, apparently the Rams actually tried to make a poach to get him as their backup for the season. And
that's a stat.
Really
it's like, yeah, we could use a backup. Give us your starter from last year.
Who you're probably going to need at some point.
Yeah.
We can talk about the Arizona Cardinals snatching victory from the jaws of defeat. Mate, it just hurts to see a league, one of the most loved legends in the league in Hunter Renfro to be the one who unfortunately coughs that ball up. Everyone loves Hunter, man.
He had 2 fumbles in the fourth. That last one, man, like, I haven't seen a human that would not have fumbled that ball. He got dealt with.
Yeah, he got leveled.
But he did drop, he did lose 5 fumbles at last season as well. So it's something to watch with Renfro moving forward.
The most important part of that choke job, though, was did you see the Raiders fans when they were up pretty big in the second half, literally popping bottles of champagne and spraying them in the crowd? The fans are loving it. The commentators were even like, how good is this? Good to see so much like positive vibes back in Las Vegas.
Yeah, sometimes the universe really comes through for us.
Aaron Rodgers still owns the Bears, as it turns out. Justin Fields is still showing glimpses of being a great quarterback. It's tough with what he's got around him. He makes at least 1 or 2 plays every week, I'll say, where you're like, wow.
It's like so obvious. You put an AJ Brown on that Bears team, they'd be so much better. Like, Dolphins have 3 receivers better than the best Bears receiver. I put Gesicki. He's more effective in the receiving game than I've seen anything from the Bears. They've got Fields, they've got a good running back,
David Montgomery,
and they've got to win somehow. And maybe they've got a good coach. I like the cut of his jib. Top end communicator apparently, so I'm willing to ride with him. Got to be better than the last couple of coaches they've had in, but yeah. But Bears are one of those teams where I'm like, I'm glad I'm not a Bears fan.
Yeah.
Sorry, Bears fans. But there's just, it's not just that you lose. It's like they've still never had a QB that's thrown for 4,000 yards.
In a season.
Yeah.
Yeah, well.
Not 5,000.
Justin maybe will get to combined 4,000 yards in a season. I can't imagine he's going to throw 4,000 anytime soon.
Yeah.
The final game I want to talk about, which happened this morning, our time, which was the Philadelphia Eagles versus the Minnesota Vikings, and that's because this has serious Aussie content. Jordan Mailata, last year's onside kick Australian of the Year.
Still yet to pick up his trophy.
Yeah, Jordan, come on, pop through and pick that up for us when you get a chance, please, mate. It's weighing down in my backpack, but Mailata looked exceptional again for the run. Jalen had 2 rushing touchdowns and I think about 80-ish yards. How good are Philly really? What do we think?
Well,
a not so convincing win over the Lions, but we're not really sure exactly where the Lions were. And now a much more impressive win over Minnesota, who just beat the pants off of Green Bay.
Yeah. I mean, Minnesota, man, that's what they do. They'll pump you up full of hope, and then the next week, like just a touch loft pass to the safety.
You like that?
Mate, Kirk Cousins, you can edit this, but he looked like his parents were cousins. He was bad tonight, man. And he was so good last week. And I'll say this about, is it Darius Slay? I always get his first name.
Darius Slay,
yeah. Mistress Lee. He almost shut out Justin Jefferson.
Yeah.
Which we thought was at least improbable. Like, he has been close to impossible to contain, to the point where a lot of NFL fans and viewers would say that he is the best receiver in the NFL. Slay's so good that I just want to see the best receivers go up against him, and he can be the barometer. How many yards you get against Slay? Because he can shut down a dude like Justin Jefferson in 2022, which is wild. If you're going to look for some promising signs, Thielen looked a bit better than he did in week 1. And another positive for Minnesota is that you never know what you'll get. They could be awesome next week.
And probably will, as the pendulum seems to suggest with them. One more extreme positive out of the game, obviously, Mr. Sipos, Australian punter. Some more good stats there as well. 45-yard average on 4 attempts, 2 inside 20. No more you can want from Aaron. Love that. And a W. The only Aussie we missed, because we didn't talk about a 16-9 loss to the Broncos, believe it or not, was Cam Johnson, who was actually the punter of the week. I'm going to say he was frequently in that role last year as well for us because he is playing for the Texans, so he has lots of work to do. 5 punts, 268 yards total, which means the only average above 50 for this week goes to Mr. Johnson. 2 of them inside 20 as well. Incredible. Let's do quickly, before we wrap up, because we didn't get a chance last week, some way too early predictions. And we sort of started on this, so if you don't mind, I will start. We should do AFC and NFC champs. I want to say NFC, most obvious, I think, is the Rams. I think roster-wise, they'll still come good, and I can see them as an NFC champion. My smoky is actually the San Francisco 49ers because of what has happened. I think now to bring in the proper game caller, which I think is maybe the decision they would have preferred to go in terms of a winning sense. Yep. Trey Lance is obviously a better talent. Jimmy will give you more wins. He is a proven quarterback.
This year he will, for sure. And he did... Debo, who is their best offensive weapon, is more effective when Jimmy G is under center. So
yeah. In terms of the AFC, I think you'd be silly to look past the Bills. The reason I will give, which is slightly more interesting,
because you're a Dolphins fan,
is because I do subscribe to the argument that you have to knock on the door a few times before you get a chance to win a Super Bowl. And the Bills have been right up there now for 3 or 4 years, always the bridesmaid, never the bride. I think it's their turn to finally get some flowers. Very quickly, give me a coach of the year and an MVP.
Coach of the year. Old Philly coaching the Jags now.
Okay.
Super Bowl winner.
Doug Peterson?
Doug Peterson. Good name retention. Coach of the year. I like that.
MVP. Too early to call for me. I'm going to say that, believe it or not, it'll probably be a quarterback. And if we're talking the way we are, it'll probably be Josh Allen.
It's always a quarterback. That's a safe bet. I'll go with the other safe bet, Pat Mahomes.
Yep, he'll come good. That, my friend, is all we have time for in the first week. It's been a pleasure to get the headsets back on, be back in our favourite studio, everything running smoothly, as always. Can't wait to be back with the Dolphins 3-0 after a big win over the Bills, mate.
Yep.
Nice.